Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Vinyl Den, your channel for record collecting by record collectors. I'm Nick. It's Tuesday, time to talk about some new releases coming out this Friday, August 16th. There's a little over 300 albums coming out this week. I got 12 on my list for today. There's a bunch of links down below. You got links for the Vinyl Den Facebook group, for the merch page, for the Spotify and Apple Music playlist that I put together every week, and the Patreon page. So make sure you check all that out. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button down below, and make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified every time I release new episodes. Like I said in the intro, there's a little over 300 albums coming out this week. I'm only going to talk about 12 on the show though today, so if there's something I don't talk about, make sure you drop me a comment down below. Let me know what you're looking forward to grabbing this week. And like always, if you're unable to find these in your local brick and mortar stores, they should all be available online. I'll put links down below in the comment section. So I think the big release this week is going to be the new album from Post Malone. This is F1 Trillion. It's a 6 studio album. It's a 2 LP release. It's kind of pricey though. It's going to run you about $46 online. There's a bunch of different variants going to be available of this. So of course it's going to be available on Standard Black. There's also a clear version, which I think is his web store exclusive. There's a green version, which is the indie exclusive, and then there's a silver version, which is the Target exclusive. Post Malone's a really interesting musician. He's had a really kind of fascinating evolution across his career. So when he released Austin last year, I think it was probably the more experimental album of his career. Had some rock elements on there, had some synth pop elements on there also. It ended the year as one of my top 3 albums. It might have been my number 1 album for last year. I absolutely love that album. That's the album that really got me into the rest of his music. So he's kind of teased out doing a country album over the last couple of years. So with this album, I'm not really sure if this is going to be a country album in name only like the Beyonce album was. But he's got a who's list of country musicians on this album. He's got Dolly Parton on here. He's got Tim McGraw, Hank Williams Jr., Chris Stapleton, Morgan Wallen, which Morgan Wallen was on the first single that came off this one, which debuted at number 1 on the Hot 100 on Billboard. Like I said, this is going to be a huge album. I'm sure it's going to sell really well. It's going to chart really well. It's definitely an album I'm going to look to grab this week when it gets released. And you got the reissue of Low End Theory by A Tribe Called Quest coming out this week. This came out back in 1991. It was their second studio album. 2 LP release, a little bit cheaper than the Post Malone album. It's going to run you about $39 online. This is an album that I've long considered one of the most influential hip-hop albums of the early part of the 90s. It was a groundbreaking album when it came out. It took this really interesting sound that they had on their first album. It really expanded on it. It's this I guess jazz-infused hip-hop is probably the best way to kind of look at it. I love this album. This is the album that really helped change rap music in the early to mid part of the 90s. Also launched the career of Busta Rhymes. But looking back on this album, it didn't really do all that well commercially. I thought I actually did better than it did. It only hit, I think, number 45 on the Billboard 200. Sold 1 million copies in the U.S. But looking back on this album 30-plus years later, man, this album is an absolute classic. You got the new album from Falling in Reverse coming out this week. This is Popular Monster. It's their 5th studio album. It's going to run you about $23 online. There's a black version of this. There's also an indie exclusive version, which is on Candyland vinyl, which is blue, red, and white marble-ish kind of color. They're a band that's really kind of gained in some popularity since their last album came out. Coming Home came out back in 2017. Since then, Ronnie Radke has been kind of a polarizing person. I think it's kind of some of the reason why they've kind of gained in popularity. The first single off this album, which is All My Life with Jelly Roll, it was pretty popular. It hit number 77 on the Billboard Hot 100, which is big for a post-hardcore song. So I think this album might be a little bit bigger than some people think it's going to be. I'm not a huge fan of their music, but I'd definitely stream it and check it out this week. And then you got Mazy Star, So Tonight I Might See. This is this came out back in 1993. It was their second studio album. This is the RSD Essentials release. This is one that I haven't seen available on vinyl in a long time. It's going to run you about $28 online. This is on translucent purple with black and purple splatter. The single, I don't remember what the one single off this album was. Fade Into You was the big track on this album. Helped push it up to number 36 on the Billboard 200. I've long considered Hope Sandoval one of the more underrated lyricists of the early to mid part of the 90s. So when this album came out, music was when it was in a very different place. It was really kind of trying to find itself, I think. It was in this transition from what grunge was earlier in the decade to kind of what alternative would be. And I think in that transition phase, you saw some of these really interesting bands kind of pop up. Mazy Star had this, like, it was like alternative rock with some like folk in there and like some psychedelic rock also. If you haven't listened to this album in a long time, it's definitely one worth checking out because I think it's better than a lot of people think it was just because of that one track. There's a couple of phenomenal jazz albums coming out this week. Both are part of the Blue Note Classic series, which these are always mastered by Kevin Gray from the original analog tapes. They're pressed to optimal. They sound fantastic. They're both going to run you about $28 online. The first one was Morgan The Jigo. Came out back in 1968. So after the success that he had with the Sidewinder in 64, he would release a series of incredible jazz albums, including this one. I think the 11-minute long title track on this album is really the gem, but beginning to end, it's just a fantastic jazz album to kind of go through. He's got a great Who's Who lineup on this one, too. He's got Wayne Shorter on here. He's got Harold Mayburn, which I'm not really all that familiar with his music, but he's also got Bob Cranshaw on here, Billy Higgins. Like I said, just an incredible album to kind of go through. If you're unfamiliar with his music, this is a great album to kind of go into and kind of start your way down the Lee Morgan path. So you got that one coming out, and then you got Wayne Shorter, Juju, released back in 1965. It was his 5th album overall. Like, it was really early on in his career. Also going to run you about $28 online. So this is really kind of an interesting period for Wayne. So he spent a lot of time working with Art Blakey. He also worked with Miles Davis in 65, so it was really kind of a busy year for him. And for the recording sessions for Juju, he brought in a lot of musicians that really kind of extensively worked with John Coltrane over the years. And he got a lot of criticism for this. There were people calling him like a Coltrane clone. But this is a great album. Juju, I think, is one of the best albums of his career. Throughout the 60s, I think this is probably one of the top 10 jazz albums of the decade. It's an album I absolutely love. I've streamed it a bunch of times. I don't own a copy of it. I'll definitely grab a copy of it this week. But he's got McCoy Tyner on here. He's got Reggie Workman, Elvin Jones. Like I said, great lineup. Those guys had all worked with Coltrane a lot on some of his bigger releases. I think they really kind of blended really well with his style on this album. There's also the expanded edition of the self-titled debut album from the Muffs coming out this week. This came out back in 1993. It's going to run you about $40 online. It is a 2 LP release, though. So the Muffs, they're a really interesting band, because I think in 1993, music was really kind of changing. Same with that Mazy Star album earlier. But what the Muffs did, at least in the mainstream, was their brand of alternative rock. It was definitely like poppier, catchier kind of music, but it had a little bit more of a harder edge to it. I think it really kind of was the precursor to what bands like Green Day would release in 1994. And I'm not calling the Muffs punk by any stretch of the imagination. They're definitely alternative rock, but I think in the mainstream, it kind of helps shift some of the focus away from grunge to what punk would do in 1994. I love this album. It's probably one of my top 20 or 25 albums of the 1990s. One I haven't listened to in a while, though. I don't have a copy of it on vinyl. I'll grab a copy of it this week. Actually, surprisingly, this album wasn't available on vinyl until 2017 when this was released. There was a couple different versions of that were released in 2017, and then it was reissued in 2020, and then we're getting this expanded edition this week. It's got 10 additional tracks on there, 8 of which are demos. It's one that I kind of went back and forth on because it was $40, but when I saw they had additional material in there, I'll definitely grab a copy of it this week. And then you got New York Dolls, Too Much Too Soon, getting reissued this week also. Came out back in 1974. It was their second and last album until I think it was 2006 when their third album came out. It's going to run you about $30 online. So the title of this album perfectly encapsulates the New York Dolls. They're a band that were definitely before their time. Punk music hadn't really broken onto the scene yet. And it's albums like this, it's albums like their debut, the stuff from the Stooges, MC5, that really kind of opened the door and helped punk music break through, in 75, 76, and moving forward in the decade. So, it's an album that isn't as good as their debut album. I know there was a lot of, issues in the recording sessions for this album, and, I think that's why they included some covers on here. There's some tracks that were old demos that they re-recorded for this album to kind of fill out the entire album. But, it's a good one to kind of go back through if you haven't listened to it in a while. The next release is one that I know they're, one of the most hated bands of the last 30 years. I think it's a really good album, and I don't have it on vinyl. I'll definitely grab a copy of it this week. This is Creed Human Clay, released back in 1999. It was their second studio album. Celebrating 25th anniversary. It's a 2 LP release. It's on gray smoke vinyl. $33 online. I know that when their first album came out in 1997, it was a huge album, but this one far surpassed anything that My Own Prison did. It was the band's first #1 on the Billboard 200, sold like 12 million copies here in the US. With Arms Wide Open and Higher were two big hits on here. Both of them had a lot of crossover success. I think it really helped push this band to the heights that they went to, and while they're still popular 25 years later. So like I said, I don't have a copy of it on vinyl. I'll grab a copy of it this week. And there's a reissue of Stankonia by Outkast coming out this week. Came out back in 2000. It was their fourth studio album, 2 LP release. It's going to run you about $39 online. So I know this is not their highest charting album. It hit #2 on the Billboard 200. And it's not their best-selling album either. I think it sold 5 million copies in the U.S. I think it's definitely their best album, at least their most complete album of their career, and probably one of the best rap albums of the early part of the 2000s. Miss Jackson was on this album. So Fresh, So Clean was on this album also. It's a great album if you haven't listened to it in a long time. I'm definitely going to grab a copy of it this week also. I think there's a lot of big releases coming out this week that I'm going to grab, so I might not be able to get all of them this week, but $39, if I can get this on sale somewhere, I might grab a copy of it. So the next album was one that I was kind of surprised by when it was released. This is Stray Cats 40, released back in 2019. It was their ninth studio album. It's going to be on white vinyl, $24. It's going to run you online. So with Stray Cats, I love the early 80s stuff, but I didn't really listen to a lot of their stuff after that. Maybe like a song here, a song there. So I didn't really listen to anything until they released 40 in 2019. And when I sat down and listened to it, like I said, I was really impressed with it. Is it their best album? I don't think so, but it was really kind of cool how they still retained a lot of that early 80s sound, but it didn't really sound overly dated. So, it's definitely one worth checking out if you're a fan of the Stray Cats. And then the last one on my list is Rockabye Baby, Lullaby renditions of Jay-Z. So this was released back in 2014. Apparently it was one of the best-selling albums of the whole Lullaby renditions series. If you're a fan of Jay-Z, it's one worth checking out. I've got a couple of these Lullaby rendition albums. I think I've got the Blink-182 one. I've got the Queen version. I think I've got the Prince one also. They're kind of, these are always like novelty albums, but they're kind of cool, like I said, if you're a fan of those musicians. Well, that's all I got for you today, guys. Thanks for checking the show out. Make sure you drop me a comment down below. Let me know what you're looking forward to grabbing this week. There's a lot of stuff I'm looking forward to. I'm definitely going to grab the Post Malone album. There's a couple other ones I'll stream and check out. I'll probably grab both of those jazz albums. I'm definitely going to grab the Muffs. I'll definitely grab that Creed album. We'll see what else I end up grabbing. It might be an expensive week for me at the record store, but let me know what you're looking forward to grabbing. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. That's all I got. Until next time, keep on spinning. Peace.